Hello everyone, welcome to Let's Learn Together program. My name is Eva, thank you for joining us. As some of you already know, this is a program of webinars initiated by Microsoft Croatia with the intention to bring educational materials closer to teachers and educators across Europe. Our guest is Mr. Terry Freedman from UK. Terry is an independent educational ICT consultant. He publishes on ICT and Education website and sends a free newsletter called Computers in Classrooms. Terry also wrote a great free ebook called Amazing Web 2.0 Project, in which you can find a lot of practical ideas on using Web 2.0 technology. Today we're going to hear more about introducing Web 2.0 into the classrooms. You will have a chance to ask Terry questions after his presentation. In case you have any difficulties with using live meeting, our technical support Marco is here with us, so don't hesitate to contact him. Terry, thank you very much for accepting our invitation to hold a webinar. It is a pleasure to have you here. Before we start, Mr. Darko Jurekovic, Partners in Learning Manager for Microsoft Croatia, is here with us to welcome all the participants. Darko?
Thank you, Eva. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for finding time to be with us for the next 60 minutes or so. I hope that this webinar will be interesting and useful to you. The topic is very interesting and compelling. How to introduce use of Web 2.0 into your classroom is something I think we are very keen to learn more about. So thank you, Terry, for presenting this to us, and let the webinar begin. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eva, and your colleague. It's a great honour to be invited to present this webinar. Having looked at the other people who have gone before me, it's quite astonishing that I've been invited. So I hope I won't disappoint you. And what I thought I'd talk about is introducing Web 2.0 into your classroom. And there are a couple of things I want to clarify. First of all, I'm not talking about introducing it into the school as a whole, but just into one classroom, just into your classroom, okay? So I'm not going to talk about how you can change the world as such, but I think it might be useful just to look at the kind of things you can do to make sure you introduce Web 2.0 into your classroom without frightening people. And I'll talk about more about that soon. But I think, first of all, I'll just talk about what I'm going to be talking about. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to talk about what exactly is Web 2.0. Because one of the things I found out from a series of blogs that I wrote called Web 2.0 for Rookies is that although we might take it for granted that everyone knows what the Web 2.0 is, that isn't necessarily the case, and some people found it really useful to have a basic explanation. So I'll go into that, and I'll also talk about why you might want to even introduce it in the first place. You know, what are the benefits, and certainly why you actually need, well, in my opinion, why you would need a strategy to introduce it, because it's all to do with the concerns that some people have about Web 2.0. And I'm going to talk about introducing it in a way which involves regarding it as a project. And I'll talk about some recommendations and look at why you need senior leaders' support and a couple of other things. And okay, let's get started. So what is Web 2.0? Well, I'm going to take a very pragmatic view of this, which is, as I've said there, I think what Web 2.0 is what Web 2.0 does. And I've borrowed that from the economist's definition of money. An economist saying that money is what money does. And what they mean by that is the fact that there are so many things which could be money. You know, when you look in society, you know, societies have had shells, we've had notes, we've had coins, we've had cattle. All sorts of things can act as money. So it's quite hard to pin down what exactly money is. So economists kind of came up with this idea that, but if something behaves like money, if it lets you do what money does, then it must be money. And I think I take the similar kind of view about Web 2.0. You know, if it's an application, especially on the internet, which lets you collaborate with other people and share stuff, then I would regard that as Web 2.0. So, and the reason I say that is because at one point, a few years ago, there was a big debate about whether podcasting is really Web 2.0. And I think myself, it's a bit of an academic, question, really, because in a strict sense, I suppose podcasting isn't Web 2.0 because it's just one person broadcasting something and other people listening. But if it gives rise to people discussing things and it allows people to comment and so on, then I would say, well, it is Web 2.0. Anyway, perhaps we can discuss that later. But what about the benefits of Web 2.0? Now, I did some research for this ebook that Eva mentioned, called the Amazing Web 2.0 Projects Book, and I asked the teachers who contributed what they thought the benefits of Web 2.0 were. And this is what they said in the order in which they said it. You can either read it from the graph or from the table on the right-hand side. But the biggest thing, the biggest benefit that they thought was participation. So using Web 2.0 like blogging or I suppose podcasting as well, social networking, that sort of thing, all of that allows the pupils to participate as opposed to just sitting there listening. And it allows them to collaborate with each other. And one of the things that they found from those two things, is that it can be highly motivating for pupils. And when I say variety of a means of expression, what it means is that traditionally in school, that pupils either can either speak their answers, or you contribute orally, or they can contribute in the form of writing, in the form of essays and that sort of thing. But Web 2.0 enables them to contribute in other ways. So it could be making a 1-minute video, for example, or it could be making a podcast, or it could be just discussing things in a forum, or writing a blog post, or even in Twitter. There are really good examples of using Twitter in that book, the Amazing Web 2.0 Projects Book. And if you think about it, it's quite hard. Well, there's lots of research which says that it's very hard to get boys, especially, doing writing. But if you can get them doing tweeting or blogging, which tends to be much shorter forms of writing, then that's a good way in. And you've got these other benefits like creativity and ownership. In other words, if someone creates something, they feel more like they've owned it, that they've got ownership of it. And the really useful thing there is, let me just draw your attention as well to one of the bits at the end, which is PLTS. And that didn't get a very high rating. And PLTS means personal learning and thinking skills. And I think probably it didn't get a high rating because when I asked people about it, the contributors are all from different countries. They probably didn't know what it was, which is quite silly of me to put it like that, really. But I've listed the personal learning and thinking skills on the right-hand side there, and as you can see, it's independent inquirers, creative thinkers, reflective learners, team workers, self-managers, and people who can participate effectively. And the interesting thing is that if you look at the so-called 21st century learning skills as they appear in pretty much every curriculum in the world, from what I've seen, certainly I've looked at about, well, I haven't looked at every curriculum in the world, obviously, but I've looked at about 6 or 8, and all of those skills appear there somewhere. So I was surprised when that didn't get a high rating, but I think when you look at some of the other things like collaboration and participation, they are mentioned, but not in those terms. So I think there are plenty of reasons why you would want to introduce Web 2.0 in the first place. Okay, let's move on. I've listed some benefits of Web 2.0 as I see them. So I think most of that is self-explanatory. And that second one, this is how the world works. I think if you look at what large companies are doing, they're all using Web 2.0 very much in one way or another. So, for example, there's a company called Procter & Gamble, which use Web 2.0 websites and social networking to engage their customers. And I think Pepsi Cola does it as well. There are lots of companies that do this. And also there are lots of companies that do it internally as well. So, for example, they may not use Facebook, for example, but they may use something like Facebook to communicate with each other internally. And I visited one company last year, and they said that they use their equivalent of Facebook all the time to exchange ideas and to do instant messaging. So we're in a world where people are using this either internally in a company or with their customers. And I actually think that if a company is using it with their customers, then the customers ought to be fairly knowledgeable about what's going on and how it's being used, if you see what I mean. So I think there are plenty of reasons to actually use it, you know, benefits of using Web 2.0. The easier communication with parents, I would say that's quite useful. Quite a few schools in the UK now are using text messaging to get through to parents, as well as using the website to try and communicate with them. And the point about, well, 2 points. One is that pupils are doing it anyway, and we need to guide young people. I do think it's very important to acknowledge that children or young people are using this stuff, or these tools, I should say, and we do need to try and ensure that they use them properly. And there was a report by someone called Tanya Byron a couple of years ago who wrote about keeping young people safe in a digital world. And she said the thing about banning social networks in schools or banning the use of Web 2.0 in general is that it doesn't really help children learn how to use these tools well or safely. And she gave the example of a swimming pool. We don't ban children from going swimming, but what we do is we have notices up telling them how they should, you know, what dangers there are, you know, not to dive in at the shallow end. But we have people in attendance that can help them if they run into difficulties. And we also teach them, we run classes in teaching them how to swim. We don't just kind of ban them from swimming and then hope they don't drown when they finally do it on their own. And that's why I think there's a benefit of doing this kind of thing in school. I'd be interested to hear what you think of that. Let's look at some statistics. Excuse me. So, as you can see, 73% of teens in the United States use social networks, and it's a pretty similar statistic elsewhere, actually. And as you can see, 12 to 17-year-olds in the USA spend 1 hour and 35 minutes texting, and in the UK, you've got young people who spend over 31 hours in an average week surfing the internet. Now, the thing is about all of these people, and in Croatia, 50% of the population uses the internet. So these are quite high figures. And the thing about the amount of time that teenagers spend on the internet is that they're also doing that while they're on their mobile phones and watching TV and doing all sorts of other things as well, which is why sometimes the number of hours they spend looks quite large and looks more than is possible. It's because they're doing all these things all at once. I I looked at these statistics well, earlier today actually, and they haven't changed much. These are pretty much the most up to date, but they date from, those particular statistics date from 2009, the first two there about the USA, but so they're probably increased by now, I would think. Okay, just give you a few more statistics. Now these statistics are changing all the time. But as you can see, you know, Facebook had 350 million users just over a month ago. Twitter gets 67 million visitors daily. An interesting thing is, I was reading that teenagers are starting to use Twitter more and more. And that's quite interesting because at first they weren't using it. But what they seem to be using it for now is for having more private conversations, which kind of sounds very strange, but you can set up a means in Twitter, I believe, whereby you can only your tweets can be seen by only a few people instead of everyone. And one of the teenagers interviewed said that Facebook was like shouting into a crowd in the streets, and using Twitter was more like talking to a room. So they are using it more and more. So again, you know, it would be a good idea to use Web 2.0 in schools in order to make sure they know how to use these tools properly. Okay. I'm just going to give you 3 quotations about Web 2.0. Excuse me. Those quotations come from the amazing Web 2.0 project book, and as you can see, what all of these people are saying is, in their own way, is that using Web 2.0 is a really good way of teaching and learning. It's a really good way of engaging the pupils. So let's look at why you might need a strategy in the first place. And I think a lot of this comes down to the fact that people do have their own concerns about Web 2.0. You know, they have a concern of what is sometimes called stranger danger. You know, if you have a pupil blogging and then someone comments on that blog, do they know who that person is? Is that person up to no good? So I think in order to be sensible and to protect your own interests, you do need to try and make sure that you introduce the use of Web 2.0 in such a way that you personally are not going to get into trouble, but which is the last point I've got there. But I also think that you need to get support from other people in order to get the best possible results. And you also need to make sure that the pupils and their parents feel comfortable with using it as well. So that's why I would suggest adopting a strategy rather than just coming in one day and doing it. And as a little aside, but it is relevant, I did hear of someone who was using Twitter in his classroom, and one of the parents complained because her son came home and said, "We don't do anything in our lessons, all we ever do is go on Twitter." And he was called before his principal and given a telling off, basically. And I think the problem was not with the way that this person was using Twitter in the classroom, but the fact that he hadn't engaged the pupils in why they were doing it. He hadn't documented any kind of good results from doing it, and he certainly hadn't told the parents in advance that he was doing it. So when you look at Twitter and people using Twitter without understanding why, it does look like nonsense. You know, you get people saying, "I'm just about to go into a meeting," or "I've just had my lunch," and other people think, well, so what? So in a way, it does have not a good reputation. If this person had adopted a strategy, he wouldn't have, hopefully, probably wouldn't have got into trouble. Okay. Now, what I would suggest this is kind of based on my experience of introducing new things in general, not just Web 2.0. I would suggest thinking of this as a project, and let me just talk about what that means, what goes into a project being good. And this is a quote from someone that's a company called Accenture, and she was talking about projects, and I think this is really, really important, because the trouble is with when you're running a project and you've got these targets, which are we will achieve whatever it is by such and such a date. One of the problems is that you can kind of get hung up about, we can get really focused on the target, and you can be really, really concerned about the time and the budget and that kind of thing, and actually forget what you're doing it for. And I think I've got should have an example or two here. Let me just go on to this. Yeah. Now, in that first one, intranet now ready, that was something that happened, that's based on an experience I had, which is that I was working in a company, in an organisation rather, and one day someone announced that the intranet was now ready. I don't know if you know what an intranet is, but it's like an internal internet. This was in the days before Web 2.0. So it's a way of communicating online, but just within the organisation. Now, I knew that we had been trying for months and months and months to get this all ready. So for all of a sudden someone to announce that it was ready, I was rather, I was rather sceptical. And I went to see this person and I said, I understand the intranet is now ready. And he said, yes, it is. And I said, I presume that what that means is that there's one computer in the entire building that has the intranet software on it, and that is now connected up. And he said, that's right. So I said, so it's not really ready in the sense that everyone in the building can use it? And he said, no. So I said, well, why did you say that then? Why did you make that announcement? And he said, well, on our strategic plan, today was the day that we had as our target date for saying the intranet is now ready. And I said to him, well, you've now put back the credibility of this project by 6 months, because no one's going to believe you the next time that you tell them something's ready when they realise that this isn't ready at all. And I think that's a clear example of where the target, the idea of the target, has totally got in the way of what is actually really at the heart of it and what people are trying to do. And the other one, police count the people they meet, is that there was this rule that was passed last year, or the year before in Britain, which is that police officers must spend less time doing paperwork and more time being out on the street actually meeting people and talking to people and dealing with real people. And one police force decided, because all the police forces in Britain are independent of each other, one police force decided it was really important to show that they were meeting that target. So they called their police officers back an hour before the end of their shift every day so that they could fill out these forms saying how many people they'd met. And that's another example of, I think, of where the target has overtaken what they're really trying to do. So I'll come back to projects in a second. I'll just go on to the concerns about Web 2.0, which is that this is what I found out from that book. Then I'll go back to the project idea. So the first thing, as I've already mentioned, is that people were very concerned about e-safety issues, about digital safety. They're also concerned about whether students were going to conduct themselves well online, and also how that would affect the school and the school's reputation. So one of the things that comes into that is whether children are going to bully other children and that sort of thing. There was also the thing about the traditional ethos, whereby in some schools they said, well, we don't really use computers here, or we don't really need to use ICT. We've really always had good results. Why would we want to do that? And that's quite a tough thing to answer. Except in that particular case, I would say, well, some children are shy. Some people might not respond well to a class discussion, but they might respond very well to a discussion using a blog or a forum in which they can express their views, even perhaps anonymously. There was also the concern about how do you actually assess whether pupils have actually acquired the skills, because it's quite hard to judge in a way whether someone is doing really well or not well in a forum. How do you judge whether their contributions are valid or good or not? And there's also the concern about ICT skills, so the skills that staff had and also students had. Now, I know we have this idea, which you've probably come across, that children, all kids are digital natives. But the thing is they're not. And they might pick up things very quickly, but that doesn't make them incredibly skilled. It just means that they pick up things very quickly. And in the research that has been done, this has been shown to be the case, that children, young people will pick up skills very quickly. They don't necessarily go into any great depth. And in fact, they don't know what they don't know. And there's an article on my website which is actually about a girl called Edith, who at the time was 14 years old. And we interviewed her, my wife and I. And there's a podcast there. And what she was saying, that she felt that she was being undertaught in her school, because her teachers just assumed that she and her friends knew everything there was to know about ICT, and so they weren't really teaching them. But she said that they don't know what they don't know, so they did feel that they were missing out. So, and in other research, well, for the research for this amazing Web 2.0 projects book, it turned out that in some cases these students did need to be taught how to use things like Twitter or social networks. And sometimes the infrastructure isn't very good. You know, if the broadband connection keeps failing or something like that, that's going to prevent you doing really good stuff. So you need to get that in order first. And I would always say have technical support ready. And I was quite taken in a way, quite pleased that Eva said that if anyone runs into difficulties during this webinar, there's technical support available. I think that's absolutely crucial to have that safety net. Okay, let's talk about projects. Now, these are the things which have been found to lead to successful projects. Now, not just in education, but in general. So this was done in Wordle, but all of these are kind of the same level, really. But one of the things was that it should be reproducible. In other words, that if for a project to be successful, it needs to be something that other people can take on. And that's why it's quite good introducing Web 2.0 in a classroom, because it's scalable. That's another attribute listed there. In other words, let me put it another way. If you were to have, let's say, a research project of $50,000 in order to find out if something worked, that's not very reproducible, because it's quite hard to come by $50,000. On the other hand, if you introduce, say, the use of Twitter into your classroom, and that works, then another colleague can introduce it into their classroom. And by scalable, what that means is that you could introduce it into, let's say, if you've tried it in 1 or 2 classrooms, you could then introduce it into a whole year group, so you can gradually build up. That also ties in with the fact that it needs to be manageable. Okay, it's no good taking on something that's going to tie up loads of people's time for 6 weeks or 10 weeks or a year. It's got to be something which is much more manageable than that. And where I put school development plan, I think it does need to tie in very much with that. In the UK, every school has to have a school development plan. In other words, it needs to set out what it's hoping to achieve over the next 2 or 3 years. And I think if you're going to introduce something like Web 2.0, you need to be able to say, this is how it will, you need to be able to say to whoever asks you, whether it's the principal or parents or pupils, you need to be able to say, this will help us achieve this particular goal on the school development plan. Excuse me. Now, being reported and documentation, I think, are linked, because if you think back to that example I gave of someone I know who introduced Twitter into his classroom but didn't bother explaining anything, what he should have done really, I think, was to have documented what he was doing. In other words, written down what he was doing and who he spoke to, and also written down what the benefits were. Because quite frankly, if there aren't any benefits of using Web 2.0 or anything else in your classroom, then really you shouldn't be wasting other people's or everyone's time going ahead with it. And what he should have done, I think, was to have written down what the benefits seemed to be or what was happening and then reported on it. If he'd have reported to parents and the principal, let's say every 2 weeks or every week or every month, I think that would have been much better. And when I say reported, I'm not talking about writing a 20-page report every time. I'm talking about a quick email saying, this is what happened today, this seemed to be quite useful, and that sort of thing. Okay, I think that probably covers that. Now, why do projects fail? These are the reasons that projects seem to fail. First of all, one of the key things is that in order for a project to succeed, you need executive support. So you need the support of the senior leadership team and the principal, that sort of thing. If those people don't support you, then it's probably going to fail, because they're not going to give you the support that you require. Also, planning. Planning is very important, as you can imagine. I think it's worthwhile spending a short while, or a few weeks, actually planning how you're going to introduce it, rather than just going ahead and coming in one day and saying, right, this is how we'll do this. Excuse me. Now, the interesting thing about the executive support is that one of the things I discovered is that if they support you, if the principal supports you in a passive way, that isn't actually very effective. In other words, if the principal says, oh yeah, great, that's wonderful, I trust you, just go ahead, that doesn't work as well as when the principal supports you in an active way, by which I mean actually saying to you, what's happening, how is the project going, what happened in your lesson, what happened yesterday, and that sort of thing. And when I spoke to people, and it wasn't to do with Web 2.0, it was to do with a different project, but I think the same things apply. They were saying that they didn't mind the principal saying, can you come along, can you give me a report on what's happening and come along next Tuesday for an hour's meeting. In fact, they actually welcomed it. Excuse me. Now, I'm just looking up some notes here just to make sure I don't lose anything. Oh yeah, one of the things that was found in companies, I'm not sure if this really applies to education, is that if someone wasn't very experienced at running a project, at running projects, then the projects tended to not succeed. Now, the reason I'm not sure that that would apply in an educational context is because I think what that comes to is to do with management experience. And if you think about it, classroom teachers are managers all the time, because you're managing 30 children or however many children there are. You're managing your administration, you know, your lesson preparation and so on. You're managing all the resources in the room. And during a lesson, you're managing what happens when and who does what, deciding whether you're going to answer that question or deal with that disruption. So you're managing all the time. So I don't think that applies in an educational context. But I could be wrong, of course. Now, let me just go on. Okay, so I'm just going to go through a few recommendations that I have in case you're thinking that you will introduce Web 2.0 into your classroom. So the first thing I would say is make sure that you share your vision with giving some practical examples of how it can be beneficial. That's the first thing. As I said before, you need to ensure that the infrastructure can cope. And I remember in one school I worked at, one of the reasons that when I went for the interview, the head teacher said what he wanted was for teachers to be using the computer rooms all the time. And when I got there, I found that no one was using the computer rooms any of the time. And the reason is that the network kept breaking down. And it wasn't until I got that sorted out that I actually got people using the facilities, because people need to be confident that the thing isn't going to fall down on them. And especially if they're not very confident to begin with, because when that happens, the teachers who are not confident tend to think it's their fault somehow if things break down. So you do need to make sure that the infrastructure can cope. And actually, as a practical example with the infrastructure coping, that's why I think if you're going to do video conferencing, given the choice between using a webcam, which is what I'm using now, or using a really high-grade video conferencing facility, which costs thousands, I would actually say go for the webcam, because most systems can cope with a webcam, but you need really high-end specialist equipment to be able to cope with a really good video conferencing system. You need to ensure there's technical and other support. When I say other support, what I'm talking about there is like classroom assistance, if you can manage it, and people who can help other people if they fall behind. But quite often I find that the pupils themselves are very good in that respect, that pupils can help other pupils. You do need to be very well organised, because if you're going to, even if you think in terms of just something relatively simple, like setting up a class blog, there are lots of questions to ask there, like, are you going to have all people's individual contributions brought together as one class blog, or is everyone going to contribute just to one space? Are you going to allow the comments to be on or off? If you're going to have the commenting off, what are you going to do to allow parents to comment? So there's lots to think about in advance. That's why I think you can't just go into it without thinking of these things. Right, sorry. My mouse seems to have packed up. Oh, right, there you are. Start on a small scale. I would say start with one classroom and maybe start for, just say, let's run this for 2 weeks, let's see what happens, rather than embarking on some huge project involving 300 children and taking a year. I think you're much better off with just 30 or 40, one classroom and just doing it for 3 or 4 weeks. I'm not really sure what's going on here, but, well, there you are. Have clear guidelines and policies, and what I meant by that was, I think you need to say to the pupils, okay, this is acceptable, this is not acceptable in terms of behaviour. Now, a really good way of doing this is to get the children involved themselves, because they know what's acceptable behaviour and what isn't acceptable behaviour online. and you've probably dealt with that already. And the basic rule is, and they will come up with this themselves, is that if you wouldn't want your grandmother to see it or hear it, then why would you want anyone else to see it or hear it? And I think everyone can understand that. That's pretty simple. Okay, and I think also you do need to kind of run some training sessions for staff. Sorry, I haven't died. It's just that this mouse seems to have stopped. Okay, let's go on to the. Is that 8, 3, 6? Sorry about that. I'm just looking up to see what the other one was. Oh yes, there it is. Sorry, not quite sure what's happening here. Okay, so it's basically to make sure that everyone knows how to use the software. Okay, 4 more recommendations. I'm going to try and put all of these up on the screen. Okay, so what I meant by restrict access, which in a way goes against what people really want to do, is I actually think you should be fairly cautious, first of all, and not just allow anyone and everyone to contribute, because you would only need one awful comment from a member of the public to make everyone really, really worried and frightened, and it would stop the project dead. So that's why I also think you need to moderate comments. Make sure that parents are informed for the reasons I gave you earlier in that anecdote I told you about. And also to collaborate and share ideas. I mean, certainly if you were to follow me on Twitter and follow some of the people who I follow, or well, actually all of the people I follow, I think, you'd soon find some really, really good ideas. And if you didn't want to do that, you could just download this book, the amazing Web 2.0 projects book, and look up some of those people and follow them, and share ideas with them as well, and benefit from them. I'm just going to race through this last bit because I'm aware of the time. Okay, just get those all on the screen at once. What that really amounts to is that when I say about research, it's really to do with documenting what you do. And I don't think it needs to be done in a very kind of academic way. But sometimes you get these gems and you need to capture them. So, for example, I was running this multimedia project with 6 primary schools and a secondary school. And they had to make these videos and collaborate with each other. And I asked this class of 8-year-olds what they thought they gained from doing this. And I thought they were going to say they learned how to use a video camera and how to do editing, video editing. And one little girl said, oh, we learned to talk about our differences of opinion instead of fighting about it, which I thought was quite good. And I think if you can kind of capture those sorts of things, that counts as research. And it's a really good thing to share those things with colleagues and maybe other people who are more skeptical. And all of these other things are kind of just, they're just basically repetitions of what I've already said in a way. The only thing I haven't already addressed is something called objection analysis. And what that means and it is, and this is really, really worth, doing, is trying to think in advance of what people's objections might be and thinking of what your answers to that will be. And the thing is, it's very powerful, because if you can't think of an answer, that means that you're probably not ready to go ahead, because there should be an answer. But if you have got an answer, then you'll need to think about it in advance, because if you're anything like me, when people ask you questions and you're put on the spot, you can't necessarily think of the answer straight away, even though that you know the answer. Excuse me. Okay. And just to repeat, I would say that there are these prerequisites. Now, a couple of things I haven't dealt with are the orientation, and that is really to do with getting people used to that environment. So you can get them using something, not for real, if you see what I mean, just to give them an idea of what it's like. And this is where, if you've got something called a virtual learning environment in your school, or in the UK, we've got these versions of that called learning platforms. And that's all in an enclosed environment, so not really on the internet as such. So other people can't get access, but it's a really good way of kind of training people and getting used to using it. And it's also a good way of using the facilities that you've already got. I'm going to finish off now. I know it's been a bit of a race through, but I wanted to allow some time for questions. But if you wanted to look at this book, then then this is where to get it. That's the website to get it from. And what it consists of is about 90 projects taken from all over the world, at all different levels of education, right from primary to university, and in various subjects, you know, history, geography, all sorts of things, and using all different kinds of Web 2.0 applications like social networking, blogs, Twitter, and other things. But the really great thing, this is what people have told me, is that you can look at a project which was done using, let's say, in an age group that you don't teach, in a subject you don't teach, but adapt the ideas. There's some brilliant ideas there, and that's all free. And what the book also contains is, excuse me, is information from each person about the difficulties they had in introducing Web 2.0 in their particular case, and how they got over it, how they got around it. So although I've summarised everything that I've said, it's not quite the same as getting the in-depth view of, you know, if someone is doing something or has done something that you'd really like to do yourself. It's really good to be able to see what problems they had and how they went about dealing with them. So do download that. As I think I've said, it's completely free. And that's it from me. So I don't know if you have any questions.
Terry, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. Your experiences in this field is very valuable, and I'm sure all this information will be very useful to our participants. After this webinar, you will all receive a link to the recording of the webinar, and we will also include links to Terry's website and a link to the copy of the amazing Web 2.0 project book. So let's see if we have any questions from the participants. You can ask questions orally by turning on your microphone or by using the Q&A tool, just writing it down. So Terry, which age do you think is appropriate for kids to start using this kind of technology? Is there a limit?
Well, interestingly, I would say no, because when you look at this Web 2.0 projects book, you'll see that some people have started in the nursery age, you know, 3 years old, and there's someone in Canada, for example, who I think her name is Kathy Cassidy, who uses blogging with children who haven't even learned to write yet. You know, they tell her what they're trying to express in their blog, and she helps them type it in, even though they haven't yet learned to write. And she does that because it's a really good way of getting them to talk and to think about things and to engage. So I would actually say, no, there's probably no limit.
Okay, and in the book that you've mentioned, there is a kind of a selection of different tools for different ages, right? So people
Yes.
can actually find tools for the age of their classroom. So it's that's kind of nice. And what do you think parents think about using this kind of technology? That in their eyes, it might seem like wasting their kids' time.
Yes, I agree. I think there's a mixture of things, which is because the thing is about parents, but about everyone really, is that everyone has had experience of going to school, and unless you're 14 or something, your experience of going to school is pretty much sitting in a room listening to a teacher talking. So that is most people's model in their minds about what teaching is, and that's how they learnt. And if they're successful and they've got a job and everything, then obviously the next thing that they would think is, well, that worked for me, why wouldn't it work for anyone else? But I think we live in a different age now, and in all sorts of fields of life, what people are finding is that collaborating with other people leads to better solutions than trying to just do it on your own or just listening completely to one other person as an expert. Even though I'm not one of these people who thinks you should get rid of the teacher as expert altogether. But I think parents do think, well, is this just playing? Is this just a waste of time? And I also think they probably also worry about some of the things you hear about on the internet, you know, like young people being contacted by people whose motivations aren't very good. But that, for those kind of reasons, I think you need to A, be clear about what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it, and B, communicate that with parents in advance, because it's much better, I think, to tell parents what you're doing and to invite them to even come along and take part in it, or to voice any fears or questions they have, than to let them find out about it afterwards, and perhaps not in a way that you would welcome. Like that example I gave before, where a child went home and said, we don't do anything, all we do is Twitter or in every lesson. In one sense, that was true, but in another sense, it was untrue, because the teacher did have valid educational reasons for using it. And it would have been better if he'd have explained that to parents in advance, rather than let parents get a wrong impression.
Mm-hmm. And what's your experience with the school principal's support? Is that crucial for a teacher to use this kind of technology in their classroom? And what's the easiest way to explain the importance of this?
Well, I think the easiest way to explain the importance of it to the principal is to make sure that he or she can see that there's a link between what you're trying to do and what the school's aims are. So, for example, if the school's aim is to get more people passing their exams, then the thing to do is to do some research to find where that has actually been the case through using blogs and things. Or at least make a good case yourself for why that should be the case. Or if one of the school's aims is to make every child feel included and important, then obviously using something like a forum is very good. If one of the aims of the school is to maintain friendly relations with people from overseas, then using something like video conferencing, perhaps even using a webcam, would be a really good way and an easy way of achieving that. So I think what people have to do is they have to recognise that getting the school principal support is really important, but then they have to recognise that in order to get that support, you have to show the school principal that what you're doing will actually help them achieve their aims. It's not always easy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and is there a way for ensuring that a student will use it in the right way, or to rephrase it, not to misuse it? You talked about it towards the end of the presentation, but I'm curious, should a teacher monitor what the kids are doing, or just leave them their freedom?
Well, I think they should be monitored, and I don't even think it's necessarily because you think they're going to misuse it deliberately. So, for example, I've come across cases where a girl has been talking to someone on the internet who seems quite friendly, and through instant messaging, and is about to give them her mobile phone number. Well, that's completely inappropriate, because she didn't really know who this person was, and the teacher was able to stop that happening. So I do think you need to kind of monitor, very much so.
Okay. And if a teacher is completely new to having a Web 2.0 in their classroom, which tool would you recommend for them to start with?
I would suggest something like either blogging or using a forum. And although a forum, I suppose, has been around longer than Web 2.0, it's quite nice because you can set up discussions questions to discuss. You can set it up so that only people from within the past can contribute, so you haven't got to worry about who else is going to see it. And you can take it from there. You can see how you manage that and how the pupils like it as well. Or an even simpler method would be to start using an online poll, an online survey, and then discussing the results. So there are lots of kind of simple ways in, I think. But one way that a lot of people have found really good is to get children using blogging as a way of making notes on what they've learnt or on what they think. And that's quite nice as well. It's more interesting than just writing essays.
Okay, if there aren't any more questions, I have one last question for the end. I have read an interesting article on your website about you playing music in the background during your classes. Can you tell me more about that?
Yes. Now, I was ahead of my time, I think, because this was about 15 years ago, and I found that if I had a very kind of very unruly class in a way, not unruly in the sense that indisciplined, but they like to kind of talk very loudly, and it was sometimes hard settling them down to work. I found that if I played Vivaldi or other music like that, it very, very softly in the background, it completely calmed them down and made them work harder. And I've read of research since then that says that it seems to say that music from that era actually affects people's brainwaves and actually does make them more relaxed and more alert. So I wish now I'd have written more about it in that day and age, but I just discovered it's kind of by accident, really. But it definitely works.
Okay, well, there's a tip for all the participants here. Play music for your kids.
Yeah,
okay.
It has to be it has to be Vivaldi, a nice music. It can't be their awful music.
Well, there has to be some compromise too, right?
Yes.
Okay. Terry, thank you again for being a part of this program. It was a real pleasure to hear your presentation. I wish you all the best in your future work. It's time to wrap it up. Thank you everyone for participating. Join us again this Wednesday when Mrs. Carol Rainbow will talk about e-safety for young learners. That should be also interesting. If you have any comments or ideas, feel free to write to us using the email address on the screen. So thank you everyone again. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
You all have a nice day, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, Eva. Bye.
Bye, Terry. Bye.